When I first saw the ad, I thought it was a mistake. The salary was almost 3 times higher than average, accommodation was included, meals were paid for by the employer, there were monthly bonuses, health insurance, and on-site security. The only condition was complete silence about the details of the job. The client's name was not mentioned, only that it involved serving a world-class public figure. To me, a 26-year-old woman tired of shifts in hotels and cheap motels, it seemed like an opportunity not to be missed. I went through an interview at the agency. A stern woman asked me dozens of questions and then stared silently at the computer screen. She said only one sentence: "If you make the list, you will be contacted." 2 days later, I got a call. They said I was hired. They gave me an address in the suburbs of Los Angeles with a note: "Be there at 9 o'clock sharp, the location is guarded." I saw the mansion from afar. It towered over the hillside, surrounded by cameras, gates, and security guards in black uniforms. When they let me in, I realized it wasn't a house, but a fortress. But inside, everything sparkled with luxury. Marble floors, gilded mirrors, endless corridors where you could get lost. We were met by a man in a suit, not the owner himself, but the personnel manager. He showed us, the new employees, around the main areas, gave us uniforms and key cards, and emphasized, "There are doors you are not allowed to enter. This is not up for discussion." I signed a non-disclosure agreement. It contained clauses that seemed excessive. No discussing who visits the house, what equipment is in the rooms, what is served at the table. Everything was strict and formal. Violations were punishable by 6-figure fines. Fear kept us all on our toes. When I found out whose house this mansion was, I gasped. The name was spoken quietly, as if it were something sacred. P. Diddy rapper, producer, billionaire. I grew up listening to his music, and now I was cleaning his bedroom. It seemed absurd. But none of the staff showed any emotion. There was a strict hierarchy here. There were rooms that only a select few had access to. There were areas that were only entered at night. Some employees didn't even greet each other. Everything was done according to schedule, strictly according to instructions. No unnecessary questions were asked. The first few days were tense. I was given a list of duties: cleaning personal apartments, changing linen, taking care of the wardrobe. I tried to be inconspicuous, not to linger in the corridors, not to look into the eyes of those who looked more important. Security checked everything, from bags to the contents of phones. In the staff room, there was a monitor with the guest's schedule. We were forbidden to appear in the area where he was at any given moment. Violations were punishable by dismissal without explanation. Every evening, I went to bed feeling like I was playing some strange game where the stakes were my safety. The house was too quiet. Sound was lost within such huge walls, creating an unsettling atmosphere. Sometimes, while cleaning the laundry room or sorting dry cleaning, I heard footsteps in the corridors, even though no one was there. One night, I woke up to a click. The lamp in the room where I lived was on, even though I clearly remembered turning it off. I chalked it up to fatigue. But with each passing day, the tension grew. My colleagues didn't talk to each other. Almost all of them were on short contracts, 3 months, 6 months, rarely longer. Some just disappeared. A new guy came to the dining room one day, and the next day he was gone. No one explained anything. It felt like everything here lived by its own rules, incomprehensible to outsiders. But despite my anxiety, I held on. I couldn't miss this chance. The money was too good, and I had debts. Besides, part of me was fascinated by this place. I felt like a mouse that had fallen into a precious box, scary, but impossible not to look around. On the walls hung paintings that I thought I had seen in museums. In the cellars stood wines dating back to the 19th century. In the kitchen were chefs capable of preparing any dish in the world in 5 minutes. Everything I had ever seen in magazines was here, within arm's reach. And yet behind all this luxury, there was a shadow. It was as if the house was hiding something. I didn't know what would happen next. But even then, deep down, I understood that I had ended up in a place where ordinary people shouldn't go, and if you did end up there, it was better not to ask too many questions. Over time, I began to notice things that seemed insignificant on the first day. The system by which everything worked here was not based solely on official instructions. The house had its own unspoken rules, ones that no one spoke aloud, but everyone strictly adhered to. They couldn't be found in the contract, and it was impossible to learn them from the manager. These were rules that you felt with your skin. The first thing I learned was not to look up, not at the ceiling. You just couldn't linger your gaze on the stairs if someone was walking up them. It didn't matter if it was a security guard, an assistant, or one of the guests. You had to look away, pretend you didn't see anything. When one of the new maids broke this rule, she simply disappeared. Her bed in the staff room was made as if no one had ever lived there. The second rule was not to ask questions, even the most mundane ones. For example, why there was always a box of ice in the refrigerator, even though no one used it, or why 2 or 3 pillows were taken out of the master bedroom every day, or why black cars with tinted windows pulled up to the house at night. We all saw all this, but no one asked any questions. It was taboo here. Even a simple, "Where did Jason go?" could be met with silence and warning glances. There were also rooms to which we had no access. Some doors could not be opened even with a master key. They were smooth, without handles, with a barely noticeable seam on the wall. Such doors appeared suddenly, as if they weren't there during the day, and at night, they simply grew out of the floor. Once I left the vacuum cleaner next to such a door, and when I returned, it was gone. No traces. I didn't tell anyone about it. But the strangest thing was that the arrangement of things inside the house often changed. For example, in one of the bathrooms, I put towels on the shelf every day. The next day, they were folded differently, and they smelled different, as if someone else had touched them. Or the dishes. I would put the plates in the cupboard, but the next morning, they would be washed, even though I knew for sure that no one had been in there. It felt like someone was checking on us, watching us, interfering. Sometimes it seemed to me that I wasn't cleaning up after living people, but erasing the traces of someone else's rituals. The rooms also had their own atmosphere. Some felt cold, even when it was warm. In one of the living rooms, I always smelled dust, even though it was sparkling clean. I only went down to the basement once. It was too quiet there, as if the space itself muffled footsteps. The walls were lined with soundproofing. The floor was covered with rubber. No wine, no boxes, no old furniture, just emptiness. I went back upstairs and never returned. The mansion was not just a house, it was an organism. It lived according to its own rhythms, and we were all part of it, like cells in a body. The staff here changed frequently, as if the house itself pushed out those who were too curious or weak. Those who remained learned to be silent, not to think, not to analyze, just follow instructions, at a certain time, in a certain way, with a certain expression. I began to dream that I was walking around the house at night, without shoes, without a uniform, and every time I found myself in front of one of the forbidden doors. I don't remember if I opened it in my dream, but every morning I woke up with the feeling that I had gone somewhere I shouldn't have. Sometimes I woke up and noticed dust under my fingernails, or the clothes I took off in the evening were not where I left them. I didn't tell anyone about it. I was afraid they would think I was crazy, or worse, that there would be no more mornings to wake up to. From the outside, this mansion looked like a model of wealth, success, and grandeur. But inside, it was a trap. And the longer I lived there, the more clearly I felt that I was already inside, and there might be no way out. As long as I did my job, everything was fine. But inside, my anxiety was growing. What if I made a mistake? What if I opened the wrong door, or heard the wrong sound? I didn't know yet that my first mistake was just around the corner. But deep down, I found myself thinking more and more often, I'm not just cleaning up someone else's mess. I'm erasing traces of something that must not be discovered. I wasn't going to go in there, honestly. That night, I just went to check the bedding in the West Wing. I was told that one of the guests was supposed to move in there, and when that happened, we had to make sure everything was in perfect order. At first, I didn't understand why the security guard, who always sat at the entrance to the wing, was suddenly absent. It was just empty. No sound, no light, as if the entire section of the house had died out. And it was strange, because there was usually always someone there, especially at night. I was holding a stack of pillowcases and a blanket, moving along the familiar corridor. The light was dim, as if the lamps were not working at full power. I stopped at the door to the farthest room. It was usually closed, but that night it was ajar. Just a little, as if someone had just entered or left. I was overcome by the feeling that I shouldn't go in there, but my feet moved on their own. Maybe it was fatigue, maybe curiosity, or maybe the house just knew when a person was ready to cross the line. It was dark inside, but I could see the outlines. The room didn't look like a bedroom. It was more like a private office. The curtains were tightly closed, there was a handmade carpet on the floor, and there was a heavy smell of wood and something metallic in the air. In the middle of the room stood a massive table, and behind it was a leather armchair. I could only see its silhouette, but I knew for sure that it had its back turned to me. It seemed pointless. There couldn't be anyone there. But I felt that someone was there. I slowly moved closer, trying not to make a sound. I just needed to leave the laundry and go. But when I took a step forward, my gaze caught on a glass display case against the wall. Inside was something strange. These were not cups, certificates, or awards. These were personal items: watches, glasses, bracelets, smartphones. They were all neatly arranged, as if in a museum display case. But none of these devices looked new. On the contrary, many were scratched, with cracks on the screens. It seemed that these were forgotten, broken, or even abandoned items. I didn't understand why anyone would keep such things. I came closer and saw that there was a tag with a name under each item. Black letters on a white background. Everything was neat: name, date. Some of the dates were very recent. The names were different: female, male. Some seemed familiar to me. Perhaps they were guests, or employees, or I didn't know. But a feeling of fear began to rise inside me. I wanted to leave, but suddenly I heard a quiet click. The door closed behind me. Turning around, I rushed to it, but it wouldn't budge. There was no lock, no handle on this side. I was inside, in the West Wing, in a room I wasn't supposed to enter. Suddenly something stirred in the chair. I couldn't see the face, but the chair slowly turned toward me. I froze. My thoughts stopped. I could feel my heart beating, the blood rushing in my ears. I didn't know who it was, but he knew I was there. The next thing I remember is standing behind the door in the hallway. The blanket and pillowcases were lying on the floor. I didn't remember how I got out. I didn't remember if the door opened. My head was empty. My body was shaking. I picked up the bedding and went back. No one stopped me. No one asked any questions. I didn't tell anyone about it. The next morning, I noticed that the display case was gone. In its place was just a white wall, as if nothing had ever been there. I started to think that it was all a figment of my imagination. Stress, exhaustion. But when I went into my room that evening, there was a small tag on the nightstand. White, with black letters. My name, and the date. From that moment on, I no longer felt like a guest in that house. I became part of its structure, another shadow moving around at night. I was scared, but not because of the unknown. I was scared because I knew too much, and I couldn't leave. From that day on, I was different. I was no longer just a maid washing linens and polishing floors in a celebrity's house. I became an observer. Someone who saw more than she was allowed to. Someone who knew that behind the facade of wealth, fame, and glitz, there was something dark, as if it lived within the walls and absorbed everything that went on in that mansion. And when I saw my name tag, I knew there was no turning back. At first, I tried to forget. I lived my life as usual, doing my job, smiling at the other employees, listening to the commands of the manager who kept saying that we had a unique opportunity to be part of a legend. But I didn't believe in legends anymore. I began to notice details I had previously missed. Cameras hidden in innocuous places, locks that clicked automatically, people who suddenly disappeared. One of the drivers I often had coffee with just didn't show up for his shift. No one talked about him. No one was interested. His room was cleaned out that same night, as if he didn't exist. And in the basement, where we had no access, the lights were on almost around the clock. I knew I was taking a risk, but I couldn't close my eyes anymore. Fear fought with rage that I had become a part of this without even realizing how. Thus began my evidence gathering. I made a habit of carrying a small notebook hidden in the pocket of my uniform. In it, I briefly recorded anything unusual, who I saw, at what time, what was out of place. Sometimes I took photos on an old cell phone I kept in my room, disconnected from the internet. I didn't believe that conventional means of communication were safe here. One of the first places I decided to take a closer look was the office on the second floor. It was considered private, and none of the staff had access to it. But I waited for the moment when the owner left for an event. Then the whole house would go quiet for a few hours. I went up quietly, bypassing the sensors and cameras. I already knew where they were located. The door was locked, but there was a weakness in the lock. One of the pawls that could be gently pushed back with a hairpin. I had to practice on laundry room doors before I dared apply it here. The study turned out to be more than just an office. It was a space of control. On one wall hung a map of the mansion, complete with markings and lights. It was a surveillance system linked to all the cameras in the house. I saw one monitor broadcasting live from the staff lounge, another from the kitchen, even the shower room. Everything was being recorded, everything was being saved. There were thumb drives on the shelf, signed by date. I didn't know what was on them, but I had a feeling it was dirt, or evidence, or blackmail. I couldn't take them. It would be too conspicuous. But I photographed everything. The map, the signatures, the contents of the tables. With every step I took, I realized I was sinking deeper. There were more clues, but I couldn't see a way out. The only other option was to come clean. But who could I trust? The police? Maybe. But this man had connections, money, power, and I was alone, with no name, no protection. All I had was the truth. I kept it in my notebook, in my photos, in my memory. One day, I noticed I was being watched. Not explicitly. Someone from security walked past the kitchen too often when I was there. My room seemed to be inspected by someone. The bed was laid out a little differently than I'd left it, and the window I always kept closed was ajar. Then I started sleeping with my phone under my pillow. I started leaving little paper traps in drawers to see who touched them, and each time I was convinced someone knew I was looking for something. But it was too late to stop. I felt like I was becoming a hunter in a house full of predators. I wasn't afraid for my job anymore. I was afraid for my life. But if I escaped, who would tell the truth? Who would bring to light what lurked within these walls? That night, I promised myself I would find out. I would get to the bottom of it. I won't let it stay hidden. Even if I have to disappear, I'll leave a trail behind me. In the 5th month of working at the mansion, I realized that I had gone too far. Every move I made became more careful, every look more careful. I stopped sleeping well. Under my pillow, I had an old button phone without a SIM card, a flash drive with copies of some photos, and a piece of paper with the address of a friend in another city whom I hadn't seen for years. She didn't even know I was working as a maid for such a person. I just figured if I disappeared, at least someone would know where to send copies of the evidence. I noticed that my shifts were changing. I was working more and more nights. The manager no longer gave me a fake smile. He became almost invisible. Guards appeared in places where no one had been before. They no longer hid the fact that they were watching. Sometimes I caught their glances, cold, long, as if they had already decided my fate. One of them accidentally dropped a key by the laundry room, a key with my name tag on it. He just looked at me without picking up the key and walked away. I stood with that key in my hand as if with a sentence. I no longer belonged to myself. I was being tagged. Events began to accelerate. One night, I went to take out the trash as usual. It was about 2 o'clock. When I got to the back door, the lock was open. Usually, it was locked. I pulled the door open and heard something click above my head. The lights went out. I was left in total darkness. I knew the house almost by feel, but at that moment my hands were shaking and I couldn't figure out where to retreat. There was a slight sound behind me, like someone standing on a dry branch. I turned around, rushed inside, slammed the door shut, and slid the deadbolt shut. My heart thundered as if it could be heard throughout the house. In the morning, I pretended nothing had happened. I worked as usual, even laughing at some of the cook's jokes, though inside I was dying of anxiety. But that wasn't the worst part. The real blow came when I returned to my room. The lock was intact, but I could feel it. Something had changed. On the bed lay my uniform, clean, ironed. Only it wasn't my uniform. It was a new one, a different size, and it had someone else's name on the badge. It was like I didn't exist anymore. I gathered up all my notes and my flash drive and stuffed it in a hiding place behind the closet I'd carved into the wooden wall a few days ago. I knew that if I was found, at least someone would see it later. Maybe a new maid. Maybe a random employee. I wrote on a single sheet of paper everything I'd seen. Unvarnished. Dates, names, offices, cameras, disappearances. I sealed it all up in an old envelope and put it there. That night, I was called upstairs. They said the boss wanted to thank me personally for my loyalty. I walked down the stairs like on thin ice. My heart was beating anxiously. My legs could hardly move. I entered the office, and he was indeed there. Sitting in a chair in the shade, smoking a cigar. He hardly spoke, just stared. I felt that he knows everything, knows about the notes, knows about the study, knows about my endeavors. His silence was scarier than any words. He gestured me away, and I knew it was a warning. The last one. After that, I hardly left my room. I pretended to be sick, worked only certain hours, never stayed alone. I wasn't spying anymore, but I knew they wouldn't let me go. When you know too much, you're either silenced or you disappear without a trace. I was starting to think about getting out of this place. Not just quit, run away, drop everything, even my papers, and disappear off the face of the earth. I looked at a map of the city and searched for ways to get away without cameras, without traces. One morning, I woke up to a loud sound. It was the fire alarm. Everyone ran out of their rooms, fussing, guards yelling. I saw my chance. I grabbed only my phone and one roll of paper, a crumpled copy of part of my notes. I ran out with the others but turned the other way, toward the fence. At that moment, I realized that if not now, then never. I ran out of the mansion and didn't look back. My heart was pounding in my ears, my legs weren't feeling right, and I felt like I was going to collapse. I didn't know if anyone was chasing me. I just ran, through bushes, wet lawns, parking lots, crossed the highway in a stream of cars. When I stopped, I was a long way from the gate. I stood behind the stop, panting, in my pajamas and slippers, with a paper roll in my hands and a broken cell phone in my pocket. For the first time in 6 months, I felt not fear but some strange emptiness, freedom without direction. I didn't go to the police. I didn't believe them. The man I worked for wasn't just famous, he was powerful. His money infiltrated everywhere, even where there should be principle and law. I knew that if I stuck my neck out, I'd just be returned or silenced forever. I decided to act differently. There was only one question on my mind. Who could I give this to? I got to a cheap motel. I asked for a room for one night, paid with the rest of my cash. Then I sat on the bed all night staring at the ceiling. I thought about the people who disappeared, about the girl who came up to me in the kitchen one day and suddenly said she was scared, about how she disappeared the next day, about the young man from security who handed me a flash drive with a video and never came back. I had no right to just disappear. I stayed, so I had to speak for everyone. I found an old laptop I'd once bought for an online course. It was slow, but it still worked. I gathered all the materials, notes, copies, recordings. I started writing. It wasn't a denunciation. It was a confession. I told what I'd seen, what I'd heard, how it all added up to a horrible picture. About secret visits by masked men, about cameras with recordings that disappeared, about girls who were invited to auditions, but were never seen again. I didn't name the names of the servants, just facts, dates, places, because they too were victims. We all were. 3 days later, I sent everything to the newsrooms of several independent journalists. I created anonymous email accounts, encrypted the files, signed them with only 3 words: if I disappeared. Then I turned off my phone and smashed the SIM card, burned my uniform, threw away my badge, threw away even my shoes, as if I was tearing away a part of my past. I only kept one sheet of paper, the names of the people I wanted to warn, those who were still in the house. I didn't know when it would all come out, a day, a week, a month. But I couldn't wait any longer. I started blogging under a different name. Every day I shared details of my life, thoughts, hints. I built an image of a woman who never existed, but who had a lot of me in her. People started reading. Some guessed. Some wrote that it was fantasy. But I knew. The truth was slowly seeping out. A few weeks later, the first article appeared on an independent website. The headline was loud. I recognized my text. The journalist had changed the wording, but the facts remained. There was a flurry of comments under the article. Some believed, some laughed, some were angry. But I felt a weight lifted off my shoulders. Someone had finally heard. Later, there were more articles, interviews, investigations. Names began to surface. People I'd seen at the mansion started to disappear off the radar. Some tried to make excuses, some kept quiet. He himself, the owner of the house, released a statement calling everything a lie. But I saw in his eyes in one video how he blinked uncertainly. The way his lips trembled. He knew I'd lashed out. And he couldn't stop the wave. I wasn't allowed to live in peace. One time, someone knocked on my door at 3 a.m. I didn't answer it. In the morning, there was a cut piece of paper on the mat. Half a sentence. A reminder. I realized they were still around. I've changed my name, my appearance, moved to another city. I'm not looking for fame. I'm just alive. I didn't keep quiet. I left a mark. And if something happens to me, that trail will lead back to them. The truth is a dangerous thing. It's feared, fought against, hidden. But I did the most important thing. I let it out. I was a maid to the most powerful man in the world, and I saw what I shouldn't have seen. But I didn't turn away. I told. Now I just live. Every day is a gift, and every day I wake up with one thing on my mind. I got out.